Hey, good evening and welcome to the EAB meeting. We have a special program tonight on the issue of lead in the water. And we'll also be welcoming our student members. I'll begin though with a approval of the August 16th minutes. Is there a motion to approve? Any second? All in favor? All right, so the minutes are approved. And we have, I know, two of our student members. Would you like to introduce them, Evelyn?
We're very happy to welcome back Neve Pfaff in the white sweater and her sister Roisin. We've worked with great success for Leo and I were trying to figure it out, or I was trying to figure out maybe since 2016 or 17 with Dr. Gordon with his science research students. It's a course in the Garden City High School. Last year, Neve amazed us when we went to the science symposium. I think everybody was here. In addition to her science research project, she was listening to us talking about recycling cardboard and decided to make paper out of cardboard, and she did it, right? So we, over the years, have had wonderful, creative, and scientific analyses and projects from the students, and we're sure that these young ladies will do the same. And Mary has, if you want to talk about the president of the Hope Club.
Sure. Actually, I think Kelly's going to do our outreach. We started last year with the tradition of the two science research and one representative from the Hope Club. Do you want to fill us in, Kelly?
Sure. So we'll just reach out to Robert Weidenhoft at the Garden City High School. The president of the Hope Club is currently an 11th grader, Alicia Zhang, and we'll see if she's interested. And if not, if another member of their council would be interested in joining. Thanks.
Thank you, Evelyn and Kelly, and welcome to our student members, and welcome back, Neve. All right, so we'll move on now to our program for the evening, and Stan Carey, who's Superintendent of Water and Sewer Operations, will open up.
Good evening, Mayor. Okay, good evening, Mayor, trustee, and members of the EAB. As I'm sure you're all aware, our letters hit the mailboxes about our lead testing program, and we had another exceedance back in June. We are on an accelerated program because of a prior exceedance, and we're required to do this every 6 months. Our next round will be in December. So the reason for the letter, again, 16 out of 65 homes tested above the action level for lead. The health department mandates that regardless if you were one of the 16 or 65 or not, the whole water system in the village needs to be notified. So that's why it went out to everybody. And I can tell you that it generated many, many phone calls. We're still fielding them. I think we're over a couple hundred at this point. A lot of residents are taking advantage of the lead testing program. But I would like to point out on this letter, I don't know when you get past the shock meaning of it, that there's lead in the drinking water, and you really dig into the details, there is in the third paragraph on the second page, that it was determined by routine samples from the 10 village wells that are the source of the village water. The source water has not been found to contain lead. So that really just points us in the direction of what's causing the lead in the drinking water. And it's for the most part, the lead service lines that deliver the water from the water main in the street to the home itself. And that is owned and maintained by each property owner. You could also get some traces of lead from older plumbing fixtures or lead solder within the home, depending on when the home was built and the materials that were used. So again, we are required to do this every 6 months. Our next round will be in December. So we have done a few things to try and help mitigate this, as far as reaching out and trying to assist residents with their concerns, or what steps they could take to minimize the lead that they have in their water. And one of those is the free lead testing program. Like I said, we fielded probably a couple hundred calls and feel bad we keep passing them along to H2M to schedule a testing, but that's what we offer and we continue to do that. That is a good indication once we get the sample results back of whether or not you have a whole lead service line or partial said lead service line, or some of the plumbing within the house, the home contains lead solder or older fixtures. So it's a good indication of what actions a resident can move forward and take. But as far as the lead service line identification program, the US EPA does put on the water supplier the responsibility to identify as best as they can all of the lead service lines within their system, regardless of ownership. And they were very clear on that. And it's been a difficult task for us because we did an outreach with some mailings in our annual newsletters when we put out our annual drinking water quality report. Not many people really responded to that. We went through old building records to see if the type of service material was identified on those. In some cases it was very few, but other times it was blank. But so we're really heavily relying on the water test to identify the lead service lines. We do plan on doing another outreach program through various communications to the residents, and hopefully we get better participation. But if we got half as much participation from this letter, we'd be doing pretty well. So we have to try and reach the public a little bit better. So I really don't have much more than that. I was planning on fielding any questions that the board may have or the public may have before we turn it over to Andrew. Andrew works for H2M. He's a chemical engineer. He's a licensed PE. He's going to update us on our mapping program, where we are. And like I said, we have until October of 2024 to complete that. I can report that the board did extend the agreement at the last BOT meeting for H2M to continue with that program. We should be on target to meet the mandate of October to have them identified. The problem with that is if we don't identify all of them or make a really strong effort, we have to report them as likely lead service lines. And what that'll mean is that the EPA hasn't really communicated with everyone what the next steps are once you identify them. But the feeling we get is they're going to require a certain percentage be replaced per year based on how many you have. And the less participation we have, the more we're going to have that are likely lead services. So we're really going to have a work cut out for us, even though we're not responsible to replace them. But we would have to take an active role in assisting the residents who are still unknown during that time. But with that, I'll turn it over to Andrew to update us on the mapping and the effectiveness of the orthophosphate, unless there are any other questions from the board or.
All right, so I guess I'm not sure if they're going to be answered by Andrew. That's the only concern. Should we wait until we finish the program for questions, or is it specific to the letter? Should we, I guess.
My
Okay.
question would be specific to what Mr. Carey said.
All right, so why don't we take questions specific to the letter now, and then we'll field others. We're going to start with Elizabeth, and then you'll need to come to a microphone so everyone can see you, can hear you on Zoom. So Elizabeth?
Okay, I had my water tested a while back. You could send an email to one of the labs that the state had indicated and get. So does Garden City have those results if people got their water tested that way, or do we need to turn those results into you?
Did we get those, Andrew?
Yeah.
Good evening. Yes, we did get those results from the New York State pilot program. New York State did have a pilot program for free lead testing in drinking water. That program now does no longer exist, but we have let me just pull it up. We have about 900 samples that we got from that program and the results, and they've been mapped as part of the data that I will show later.
Thank you. And my second question is, you said you might use the numbers, the lead numbers to determine who has lead service lines or not. What concentration in the water would you say is indicative of lead service lines?
Well, anything that's over 15 raises a concern. But generally what we're finding out is we're getting numbers in 50s and hundreds, and that's a strong indication that they are full lead service lines.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, so we have a resident, if you can just state your name and address and your question.
Yes, hi, I'm Pat Amato, 2237 Street. I'm very curious as to how this meeting was, how the residents of Garden City were made aware of this meeting tonight, the agenda, because I can't believe there isn't anybody here. So who could answer that for me?
So the EAB meetings are scheduled regularly, so they've been on our calendar. We sent out a village alert to people who are signed up for the alerts. After the lead letter came out, I think the topic had been water. We decided to focus on the lead service, and we put it in, it was in the Garden City News, I believe, in the calendar, and pushed out on the website and social media.
The website didn't say what the agenda was. It just said the meeting. I'm
The-
just curious, that's all, because I thought there'd be more.
Yeah, it was
people
on, the
here.
agenda was posted on the website.
It was.
But your point is taken, though, to
Yeah.
get the message out clearer. We'll
Yes.
work on doing that. Thank you.
Yes, just one other question. When you say the service lines, is that from the main, I mean, from the street to the residence? What about the pipes that are just in the main lines?
So
Have
the-
they been tested?
yes, the water mains are the larger size, from 6 to 12-inch diameter in the streets.
Uh-huh.
The service lines go from your home in the basement right to the water main in the street. And sometimes that could be on the same side of your house or on the opposite side of the street, depending on, where your house is.
So the mains have been tested. Have they shown to have any
No.
lead in them?
No,
So they're lead free, all
Mhm.
all the mains. How were the mains tested?
through our routine sampling, we have approved sample locations throughout our distribution system.
Even in the Mott section, they
Yeah.
weren't.
Yes,
That's interesting. Okay, so it's the service that goes into the.
right. The
residence.
sources were all tested too at our supply wells also. And there's no lead.
And the homes that showed lead out of the 60, were they all in the Mott section or they would throughout the village?
There was a larger concentration in the Mott section. I think we have a map to put up in a little while, but they are in other areas of the village too.
I think.
You're welcome.
I said one, just so when you're probably gonna cover this, but I just want to make sure you kind of emphasize it. You were kind of already answered one of the questions, but it's how were the 65 homes selected? And then the mapping, I'm sure you're gonna cover this, but the mapping where, do we see clusters, that sort of thing?
Want me to answer that now? I don't specifically go into how those 65 homes get selected, but there is a very strict requirement. All of the 65 homes that get selected are what they call tier 1 residences. Tier 1 residences are either homes that were built between 1983 and 1985 with copper piping with lead solder in them, or homes with lead service lines. Of the 65 sampling pool, 2 of them were homes with copper between 1983 and 1985 and have been on that list for a while. I think it used to be 3, but one of them got knocked off when they did a total renovation. So that got knocked off. The remaining 62 or 63 are homes with lead service lines. Of that pool, the village has identified approximately 120 homes with lead service lines from the sampling, from old records. And so what we do is we send out a general correspondence to just those 120 homes, asking for volunteers, and we try and get as many samples as we can out of that pool.
Okay, so then we should really emphasize that the 65 homes isn't really a random sample of the homes in.
Absolutely not.
Right,
They're
so
not,
I
they're
think
not
that's
a
something
random
that really
sample.
should be stressed here,
Mhm.
that it's not 16 out of 65 homes are gonna have problems if we expand this to 6,000. We're not gonna have 1,200.
I actually have I have a
Perfect.
little tidbit on that. It's not specifically in, but I know exactly where you're going.
Well, because reason I bring this up is because a resident did come to me and did ask me about the homes and were they representative? And I was like, I don't think so, but I,
And it's not by design, by the regulation.
right, okay, thank you.
Well, they have to not only volunteer, but they have to fall within one of those categories.
They have to fall, yes, they have to fall within one of those categories. If your home does not qualify and over the past year and a half, there have been homes that have fallen off the list because they've replaced their service line or have done other things to their homes that no longer qualify them.
Mayor, I'm sorry, I have a resident that would like me to ask a question of Stan. Can I,
Sure.
can I read? They wanted to confirm that he requested a water sampling kit. If the kit suggests there is an unhealthy amount of lead, the next step is to contact the village to replace the lead service line, which is free of charge until next year. What is the wait time to request the change?
So the replacement of the service line is not free of charge. The sampling is free of charge, which helps identify whether or not you have a lead service line. If you do have high levels, there are things that we could help you with until the resident can make a decision or hire somebody to replace the lead service line. And we have taken some steps to mitigate the amount of lead, which Andrew is going to get into. And then I'm going to close with some other areas that the village is considering. And also the permit fees have been waived.
Did you have something, Evelyn?
Yes, please. Is there any way, like correlation between when the homes were built, like older homes? Because I think it was at this meeting, otherwise with my friends, we were looking at an ad where the Mott section, but was it here, the Mott section, homes are being advertised with lead pipes. That was a feature. So I live in a house that was built in 1935. Maybe it has lead pipes.
Well, there is a correlation between what year.
Yes, there is a correlation, but that correlation is not 100% accurate by any stretch of the imagination. There was a home, specifically, it was on Stratford Avenue. It was a new construction, 2017. And what happened is the contractor cut the lead service line, hooked up the new copper line, and they had high lead levels in a brand new constructed home. So if the water main in the street is a little bit older, then, you know, if the area of development is a little bit older, then there is a chance, but not necessarily but there is certainly a correlation. That will also show up on my map. I have sample data correlated with home ages as well.
All right, so we'll go to Mr. Manfredi. Thank you. Mr.
Good
Perry.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening, board. Good evening. Just bear with me as I share a PowerPoint. And if I could just go to this first slide. Okay. Good evening, everybody. My name is Andrew Manfredi. I am here representing H2M Architects and Engineers, who's the village's engineer working on this issue. What I'm going to talk about today is obviously the GIS mapping and the orthophosphate treatment, and we'll close with a few last slides for talking about what the village has been doing. So the lead service line identification program was a rule that was part of the revised lead and copper rule back about 3 years ago now, that was required federally to all water suppliers across the United States. So by October 2024, every water supplier in the United States must tell its customers whether they have a lead service line or not. You can imagine that for larger agencies like New York City, this is a crazy, impossible task, and this is a very difficult task for even smaller villages like the Village of Garden City. But this is required by everybody. This is not just a Village of Garden City only issue. So what we are going to do in conjunction with the village is we're going to parse through all of the records. Those records could include building and plumbing permits, meter and service line replacement records, record plans such as water and sewer when the water and sewer was originally built, street development and year of construction of homes, and sampling data from both the village and the New York State Department of Health. Once we take all of those records and kind of put them together into a pot, we will take a look and overlay those data on top of each other to find correlations. What we want to try and do is we want to do prioritization of certain neighborhoods within the village and then confirm all of our records with field data. So even though we have sampling data, what we want to do is we want to go into homes and say, okay, our sampling data, our records indicate this is a copper service line. We go into the home at the homeowner's permission. We're not just going to barge in, and we confirm, okay, this is a copper service line. And we try and do that for a certain number to get a good estimate is not the right word, a good confirmation, so to speak, of the data to make sure that the data is leading us into the right direction. The goal is to confirm either lead or non-lead. So if you have a copper service line, a plastic service line, that would be a non-lead material as compared to a lead service line where you have a lead service line material. This is the map of what we have so far, and specifically where we have for overlaying sampling data with home construction. So the dots in green are all non-detects. So we took samples and we saw that none of the samples contained any detectable lead in those. The yellow are detects between 0 and 15, or between 1 and 15. So we saw detectable lead in one of the samples, which could indicate a potential lead service line, could potentially not indicate a lead service line. So there is potential around that. And then the red are detects above the 15 ppb. So those are levels that homes that have almost, I don't want to say guarantee, but a high probability of lead service lines. The stars, and they're a little hard to see here, but the stars are part of the lead copper rule compliance sampling. So stars, and most of them are in the MOT section, but they are also put in throughout the village of homes with known lead service lines where we use for compliance sampling. And there's more than that on here as well. I think there's about 80, but we have about 120 that we can pull from. We have two pools here. We have the New York State DOH sampling pool as well as the village sampling pool. And as much as you could see, we've actually sampled, we've done 1,488 different samples. So we've actually gotten a hit rate of 130 high levels. If you correspond that to 6,800 samples or 6,800 homes, that would at a rate of 8.7%, that would presume that's probably 592 samples. There we go, we'll call it 600 lead service lines without the village, correlating that data again, very, very roughly, which means the villages have probably identified roughly 20%, maybe a little bit more of those service lines through sampling. Also on there is years of construction. So you could see we've gone by decade, 1800s, 1900s, 1930s, 1940s. We'll go to the next slide and we'll take a little bit more of a closer look at the MOT section. As you can see, there's a lot of red stars in there, but there's also some green and yellow. Lead service lines generally have a lifespan of about 100 years. So if you've had a lead service line replaced, sometimes you wouldn't detect an issue. Some of those lines are potentially partial lead service line replacements as compared to full lead service line replacements. You could see kind of in that MOT section, all those homes were built in the 1920s and 1930s. But if you take a look at the light blue section, just north of the MOT section, all those homes are built in the 1950s. A lot of greens, a couple of yellows, one red. So a lot of those homes we suspect don't have lead service lines as compared to the homes that are just south of it. A lot of people have talked about specifically about the MOT section, but this is not just a MOT section specific issue. This is a village issue. The village has to go and identify all the service lines. So we take a look at an area between Adelphi and the Garden City Country Club. Here we could see a couple of reds, some yellows, mostly greens. So what we have to do as part of this program is look at each block by block, understanding the sampling, all of the records that we have, and taking a look and kind of identifying, okay, this block, potential issue. This block, maybe not an issue. This block, we have to spend a little more time with some field verification. This block, I think we're going to be okay. So each kind of one of these blocks is going to be reviewed and analyzed for understanding where are service lines, where are not service lines. The village is also included, have started orthophosphate treatment. Orthophosphate treatment is an EPA-approved method for mitigating corrosion control, specifically for lead service lines. The village started this program back in November, and it continues to inject orthophosphate continuously from November through today. So just a little bit under a year now. As we take a look at the levels in December 2022, and I'm sorry, these aren't levels, these are number of detections. We've seen about a 46% decrease from 30 detections in December to 16 detections, and this is all part of the sampling pool. This is not part of the village-wide sampling pool. This is part of LCR, the 65 homes that we were kind of talking about. And then in the fifth leader, 34 to 26, and then in the 10-minute sample, 11 to 8. What does that mean? The first leader is what we call the compliance sample. The first leader is the first liter of water that you draw after the water has been stagnant for a minimum of 6 hours, but no more than 16 hours. So after you go to sleep at night, you don't use the water, you take your first liter sample as the first water that comes out right from the tap. The fifth liter, and this is a more updated protocol of the EPA sampling. The village wanted to be on the forefront of that sampling, and we didn't want to actually, we wanted to identify problems, not just kind of be compliant with the regulation. The fifth liter sample is water that is most likely from your service line. You let the water run for about 30 seconds, and then you fill up the fifth liter. That water, which has been stagnant for about 6 hours now, or overnight, has been sitting pretty much directly in contact with the service line. Those levels are going to be significantly higher as compared to levels from your first draw. Because if you redid your kitchen in 2010 or redid your kitchen recently, all that water in the first liter is within copper piping, whereas the fifth liter is water that's most likely in your service line. Your 10-minute sample is water that is coming pretty much from the main, but it is still passing through your service line. At that point, levels are going to be significantly reduced.
Could you say that again, please? 30-second.
Yeah. Yeah, so the fifth liter sample, so imagine I'm at a faucet and I have a bottle in my hand. I'm going to turn on the faucet. The first drop that comes out, I'm going to collect it in my first liter of sample. The normal faucet generally runs about like 1.5 gallons of water per minute. So we're going to let it run for about 30 seconds, and then we're going to put another bottle in there. And that bottle is water that has kind of passed through the plumbing system and is generally sitting in your service line.
Did I misunderstand you? Did you say that the 30-second water has more lead in it than the initial one?
Correct.
Because mine are just the opposite.
That generally does happen sometimes, and it depends on the construction of your home. What I'm saying is that in general, first liters are always less than fifth liters, and 10 minutes are always less than both the first liter and fifth liter.
Not only is mine very different, mine dropped dramatically to less than 1 part per billion.
Mm-hmm.
Even though none of them were above 15 parts. The initial was never above 15 parts per billion. But the 30-second water is just drops dramatically.
It could be based on the individual composure of your home. Your service line may not be lead,
Yeah,
be a little bit longer of a run.
your service line may not be, in your case, the contributing factor to your positive results. It could be your kitchen faucet. I don't know how old it is, but if it's more than 20 years old, the regulations have changed. It could be lead in that. There could be lead solder within your home and plumbing under your sink. And you may not have a lead service line, so you're only picking it up on that first draw sample. That's why it's elevated, and then it clears up the longer you run it. Sure.
But mine, just for none of them, the last, I had 5 or 6 results. None of them are above the 15 part per billion. But the initial one is always the highest. And the 30-second one is always less than 1 part per billion.
That would indicate you most likely don't have a lead service line.
No, we had it changed.
Okay, yeah, so then That would be,
Lead solder in your house.
yeah, lead solder in the house. Almost, most probable.
You got new kitchens, new baths,
When?
very much safe.
We can go over it after the meeting. I'll be available.
Just fine.
Yep, I'll go to the next slide, which kind of shows that pattern. So here are, the yellow line is December results and the green line is, June results. So December 2022 through June 2023. So we see the first liter in December was generally, the average was 24.1 parts per billion of lead, understanding that 15 parts per billion is the action level. In June, comparable homes, comparable pool, that number goes down to 13.1. In the fifth liter, we see it was up to 65.4 in December, and again, reduced down to 38.6 in June. And then taking a look at the 10 minutes, 9.9 in December, 5.5 in June. All across the board, approximately a 40% reduction in all lead levels.
Maybe you could just briefly explain what the orthophosphate is doing and why we're seeing this trend come down.
Absolutely. Orthophosphate is a chemical that gets injected into the water that coats the interior line of the service line. What it does is it binds with lead to create lead phosphates, which are insoluble in water. So if you create insoluble lead in water, it doesn't make its way into the drinking water. It doesn't make its way into the sample. It's generally, so far as, yeah, it's generally working. Orthophosphate treatment is very much different from every other water treatment that's really available. Every other water treatment, especially kind of in groundwater, really remediates a problem immediately after treatment is implemented. Orthophosphate treatment takes anywhere from about a year or a good amount of time to really build that coating system within the service line to mitigate lead levels. So we're seeing positive results so far. You will have to keep injecting orthophosphate. There's what they call the initial dose, and then they call the maintenance dose. The initial dose right now is still what the village is in, is just increasing orthophosphate concentrations to get every nook and cranny. Think of it almost kind of as a spider web, kind of starting from the middle. So your water mains is that spider network, that spider web network. And as we inject at the different well entry points, that orthophosphate is just emanating through the system and kind of just spreading as it can.
Just to be, so no one's confused, the treatment's only going to reduce the number. If you actually want to resolve the problem, you're going to have to move the lead service lines.
Absolutely. And that was going to be my last slide, is that this only helps mitigate the issue. The best way to resolve any kind of lead issues within your home is to replace your service line, is to remove the source of lead from the equation. So the village continues. We continue on and doing a lot of things, and I just kind of broken them down into 4 points. The village is going to continue to provide sampling kits to any resident who requests it. To date, the village has provided 742 packages. 585 have been analyzed and returned. We kept trying our best to try and keep getting people to submit samples as we can, but eventually, after they don't return our phone calls for 3 weeks, we kind of eventually stop. But, you're always more than welcome to request a sample. We have a busy week this week, especially considering the letter went out, so we have 56 pending delivery. Providing and doing sampling is really, really easy. All you have to do is email or call the village in their and it's Garden City Sampling at h2m.com. You give us your home address. We will deliver a bottle on Friday. We'll ask you that you can fill up the bottles at your convenience and then put them out for pickup next Friday. We're not the best at Amazon. We're not Amazon, so we're not doing 2-day service or anything like that, but we will generally get your results within, 2 weeks of receiving your sample. Yeah, it's Garden City Sampling at h2m.com. h2m.com.
Or you could call the village.
Or you can call the village. Pace Analytical is the analytical laboratory who certifies the results from the sample. They are a third-party analytical laboratory who samples the water. You don't have to do that. You can do
Well,
this.
did we speak yesterday? Do you live in an apartment building? Yeah, so you would have to call Pace. We don't do apartment buildings. We can't do co-ops. Because it's the building superintendent's responsibility to identify the one service line. If we offered it to every individual co-op or apartment, we would be doing thousands of them, and we would only be able to tell your particular apartment if it's been redone, not necessarily what's coming in from the street through that service line. And typically, the service lines on apartments and co-ops are larger in size, and they're not typically lead. It's usually cast iron or copper. Well, that's what I suggested, that you go to the building superintendent and let him do one for the whole building.
We continue to monitor orthophosphate effectiveness. We do quarterly sampling as well as the biannual sampling of homes with historical results to review lead levels. The village continues to do enhanced sampling. The village takes quarterly water quality monitoring with the DIN distribution system and entry points every 2 weeks at the entry points, and every twice every quarterly for the distribution system, as well as daily for pH, as well as bacteriological testing and orthophosphate testing. And then the village also encourages service line replacement. So the village has waived permit fees to replace service lines. The village has applied for grants. So this is money coming from federal and state level for service line inventory funds. And we're going to continue mapping service line materials with that map that we showed before. I hope I did okay. I open,
That you said, there was nothing in Maine that tested, but then when it was, what are you looking at, or what are your markers, or potentially having problems, you said, older homes, older mains, so what, oh, sorry. I'm sorry, the name.
I'm sorry, my name is Diane Wykowski and I live on Nassau Boulevard over by Delphi there. But somebody had mentioned earlier when they said, the correlation between the age of the home? And quickly, somebody mentioned watching the age of the home and put in that same sentence, or an older water main. I thought the water mains were all fine. Why is it the older water main we're watching for?
Some people refer to the service line as the water main going to the house. So it's kind of interchangeably used, the definition of a water main. When typically in the water supply business, when we say water main, it's the big main out in the street. But some contractors and homeowners refer to the water main in their house as the service line coming in.
So then one last thing, this has been wonderful. And I really think it's a shame that we don't have more people. Are we recording this where we could re-put this out to some people? Because I could tell you, I would know a lot of people who would be very interested in hearing some of the information you put out there tonight, or even just a copy of the presentation itself would also be great.
Thank you. We are recording, so we'll look to do that. Thanks.
I'd like to just show people, this is the culprit. This was the water main that was to my house. It was replaced about 20 years ago, but I kept a piece for memento's sake. But this is what you're looking for, all right? It is fairly hefty. He'll attest to that, all right? It's maybe 3/8 of an inch thick, all right? There is a little bit of a white scale in there. I'm sure it's not orthophosphate, but over time, you will develop a scale in the line, which tends to protect the water from getting the leaching of the lead into there. So when they talk about the water that they're testing after whatever the 32nd one, it's the water that's been sitting in this line under the front of your yard, or just before the main. So this is the culprit. If you want to know what you're looking for, all right, this is a lead service line. This was my line that was replaced about 20 years ago. And Unfortunately, the cost for having a curb cut and the road cut is somewhat significant, but it's probably worthwhile.
Thank you. Right, any other questions from anyone on the board? Anyone in the room? Anyone on Zoom with any questions? No.
Julia, would you like to
Oh,
ask your
yes,
question?
actually, thank you very much. It's been a very informative meeting. What I do have is one question is, I understand what you're saying about the main water line, which is kind of like in the street, the service lines which go into the house. I'm in an apartment building and, I'm understanding that where the issue is on the service lines off of the main water line. But when you're in an apartment building and the service line is going into the apartment building, where I'm confused is, could I have the lead in the water from the service line? If they check the service line and the service line is okay, then that means the apartment building is okay? Or if there's an issue with the service line into the apartment building, then you have to look at the lead levels in the apartment. Am I understanding that correct?
Even if the service line is determined not to be lead coming into your building, one would have to look at the internal plumbing within the building to see if there's lead solder or galvanized pipe or some old plumbing fixtures and faucets to really be comfortable to say that the whole building is lead free.
Okay, fine. So there is internal looking into the apartment building in the lines off of the service line into the apartments to determine whether or not there would be lead issues into any individual apartment then. All right.
Yes,
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that.
you're welcome.
Thank you. Any other questions from anyone on Zoom? Were you going to speak about some other things the village is looking?
Yes, so just to recap quickly, the village board of trustees continues to waive the permit fees to replace lead service lines. We continue the free lead testing sampling program. We continue to do the orthophosphate to help lower the amounts of lead and build that protective film on the inside of the service lines. And just very recently, within the past couple of days, we confirmed with the village bond council that, and we really haven't presented this to the board yet, that we could legally borrow funds specific to lead service line replacement, and the individual homeowners could kind of take a loan from the village via this bond, and the payback would be through your tax bill. So we're going to be discussing that with the board, but it is an option that we're looking at to help people fund who can't afford to replace their service line.
Thank you.
Mike?
The question is, should you test every faucet?
I don't think it's worth testing every faucet. It'll probably be, if you think your faucet's more than 20 years old, it's probably cheaper to replace it.
Am I off mute? Yes. Specifically, the protocol asks for your primary source of drinking water, kitchen sink. So this wouldn't be like a slop sink that you'd want to sample that hasn't been used in 3 months or something like that. You want to be looking at where you normally use the water.
Actually, I had a question on, do we have a matrix, a metric on how people, once they're kind of advised that they most likely have a lead service line, how many are actually replacing it?
I unfortunately not many from my experience. When we get a call for a leak in the street and people calling it as a water main break, I would say 9 times out of 10, it's the service line that's leaking. And when they hire a contractor to go dig it up, they discover that it's lead and then they replace the whole thing. That's the most frequent method that we see where the service line's replaced, but people voluntarily doing it, it's not very many.
Even the people who've been told that they have lead,
Yes.
and it's predominantly the expense. And they say,
Yes.
well, I'll just switch to bottled water.
Dan, when was the last time we told residents that they have a risk of lead service lines?
The last time we told residents
Oh, just but if individual homes.
that we told them that they had lead service
Yeah, or
lines.
they have a risk
Well,
of it.
Well, this letter went out, right?
Right.
This is the second time we've done this letter. I think it was in one of our annual reports.
But individually have people gone individually to the houses or
Other than them,
just the general? list?
only if they requested a sample is really the only other way.
But there's been no individual like us calling
No.
and saying, okay, you at 124 Whitehall, we think
No.
you have a risk of it.
I think before I came on board, there was a survey that was distributed too for people to participate.
Yeah, there was surveys that were pointed out. If people call with questions about their results, generally those conversations sometimes go, yeah, you most likely have a lead service line. I've spoken to residents a couple of times before where, how do I know I have a lead service line? Kind of walk them through, okay, this is what service line looks like. Does it look like a penny? Does it not look like a penny? Yes, you have a lead service line. No, you don't. When we've also gone into homes towards the beginning of the program, when we were doing sampling towards like the very, very beginning, we were going in and we saw a lead service line. We let the homeowner know this is a lead service line.
But it's more like, we've just done more the general with the big letters, so we're.
How many lead service lines, if we know, have been replaced since this first came to our attention? It's almost 2 years ago.
We went through some of our road opening permits very recently to help with the identification program. We sent them over to H2M probably last week or earlier this week even. And it wasn't very many. I think she went back a couple years and it was around 50 maybe.
I haven't personally reviewed the data. I actually was going to try and overlay how many samples we have with bad, also with those road permit deeds. So I can try and send that over to an email to Stan sometime next week.
Hi. When a house is sold, is the owner responsible for telling the prospective buyer, hey, we have a lead service line? Is there any sort of disclosure that now that we all know that lead is terrible, that fact needs to be relayed to the prospective buyer?
That's probably more of a legal question. I don't know if it has to be disclosed, but I would certainly want to know if I was buying a house anywhere.
People are asking, not especially for the older homes.
I've heard it comes up in inspections. If you have a good inspector, it comes up in the report that you likely either have a lead service line or they think you might have a lead service line.
Yeah, that would be good.
Well, it's like, yeah, you have an engineer that comes in, will try to find, their job's to find problems. So it's also like termites and asbestos, right? You really should have the house checked for asbestos. If they don't have a termite contract, you should have it checked. And as a buyer, but it is, at the end of the day, this buyer beware, right? So if your engineer doesn't find it, they don't, same thing with asbestos, right? They don't have to report it.
I mean, I think people will replace their lead service lines if they feel it would possibly impact. No, you're saying no. The sale of their home, no.
It would only impact it if they think that it's going to be, there's no way they could sell it without, right? I mean, most people, I'm not saying, a lot of people are like, well, they don't pick it up. I won't have, because we're not talking $1,000 here. We're talking $5,000, $6,000, $7,000. Right. Or more, depending on how big your property is, how long that line is. So it would probably, I mean, as a buyer, you really should make sure your engineer checks the line. Because he should be able to do that.
And I would venture to guess, I don't like to guess, but maybe not so much recently, but the past 2 years, the way the real estate market was and how fast how homes were selling, People were so quick to get the closing, it didn't even become a question.
We're not asking about their.
It seems to me like the main thing that we have to do is figure out a way to encourage people to do this and make it, make almost like mandatory in a way, but we have to do it in the right way. So, maybe it is involved with the closing of homes. Maybe it is involved with every so many, I don't know, some kind of a permit that you do, but we probably really, this is pretty serious. So we probably really need to figure out a way to really encourage people to participate over a period of time.
I agree. And I really think this potential borrowing via a
think
bond
that's
and
great.
offering it to residents. I know Mr. Swazi will be reporting to the board and getting feedback
Yeah,
and
no,
to
that's gonna be
see.
great.
But then, that'll raise another question. If the home, if someone takes advantage of that and borrows $10,000 against the home and they have to pay it back over 20 years, what if they sell their house in 3 years? The agreement, are they going to have to pay it off, or is it going to be transferred to the new homeowner? Those are things we're going to have to work out.
Well, that should be resolved at closing,
Yeah,
If-
that would
right?
be.
I mean, you can't. You
they
can't
know
pass
about
on-
it.
You can't pass
I mean, I
on.
would think the buyer would be happy about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know what I mean? But we just have to figure this out. And then,
I think some steps are to the building department, and we don't have Mr. Giovanelli here, but do we have something now in the building department to advise people when they go to get a permit about this? I don't know if anyone here knows. We can check with them. I believe they started something there that to
I-
help raise awareness.
I don't think, it's a very good point. I don't think we did it specific to lead service lines, but we did start doing it for grease traps on restaurants because it's a pretty big problem within the sewer system. So, but that's a good add-on, and we could speak to him about that.
Okay, great, thanks.
what might be interesting is I would be taking some of your time though, but there's so many people on our St. Paul's Fields on a weekend that it might be worth us putting together one of our little tables and having like you there, or just having some of your kits or your presentations, just to talk to people, because when you're at the fields, like when I've been there with the table with balloons and stuff like that, so many people come up to you and to find out what you've got going on while they're waiting for their kid's soccer game or their football game or something like that, that might be an effective way to at least start getting some of this out. We're not having the promenades, like I would think the promenades, in the past would have been an interesting thing to have, because we have so many people stop by at the table on the promenades, right, Liz? I mean, and Mary, it's that if we, maybe we have some of the free water kits at the table, I think that would, and have the forms ready. I know it
Sure.
sounds crazy,
We
but
just,
it would be like one thing, like, but-
no, it all helps. We
Yeah.
really, we don't have, what do we have, another year to finish our identification program. So anything would help. You just make us aware when those events are and we could have somebody available.
yeah, like for like an hour.
We're on
Yeah.
call 24/7. It's part of the job.
Well, I mean, if not H2M, one of the
Yeah.
village staff could be there.
Are lead pipes the same width as copper pipes for the service lines?
No,
No.
if you
This is
looked
a
at,
crazier idea. If you look at Larry's pipe, I mean, you probably couldn't use infrared, but could you use like a huge metal detector to look on someone's yard? If they have a Larry pipe, it's lead. No, okay.
The technology doesn't exist.
it's
We've
it's
looked
too
into
deep.
it. It's too
Plus,
deep.
it's too deep to do that. It can be traced. The location can be identified, but not the type of material. It's very difficult.
If that technology exists, it would be in Garden City.
Right, so thank you. Any other questions on Zoom before we adjourn the meeting?
So
Oh.
Didn't ask him to. Oh, you did. I know we have a resident in the room who's a former EAB member. I don't know if you want to share for people who are considering replacing their lead service line, how that process was. Was it disruptive? How long it took? I don't, you're welcome to, Leo, if you'd like to, would like to.
Sure.
We'll give you a microphone.
We had the first estimate. By the way, I have some results I would like to share because I'm still mystified, Andrew, at what you said about those numbers, and I'd like to share that too. We got an estimate, and the first contractor came and said we were going to have to. The family, my wife and I, are responsible for the sidewalk. The curb was going to be dug up. The lawn was going to be dug up. And he gave us a price, something like $7,000. Our neighbor said to us, listen, I had it done. And if you go to, let me think of the name of the company that did it. It was Orchid Sewer and Water. They don't do any of that. Somehow they dig down and they pull the lead, the copper pipe through. So it was much cheaper. They didn't ruin the sidewalk. They didn't dig up the lawn. They did go into the street because we had to go across the street to the other line. It was quick. They came at 8 o'clock in the morning and they were out by 2 o'clock. And my son came by later to see how he lives in town, and he came by to see how. He said, "Oh, they didn't come." I said, "Yeah, they did come, and they did it. It's done." So they somehow they dug it up and they pulled the pipe through. So it's great. What else do I want to say about it? The first company asked for a deposit, whether we took them or not. They wanted $100. This company, Orchid, didn't. They were terrific, and you have to give them. We had to give them a couple of weeks lead time, and I have the results of what happened, and I'd like to share them with you. But the numbers dropped. The numbers did drop, and when you get it, I just want to, I'm going to pass these out. You could pass these around, and I'll just give you some too. Would you pass one to each? And
Thank you.
so we followed the village's instructions. We did it we took the first bottle of water. We filled up the first container 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, filled it up. You see the results. That's the first column on the left. And then we did the 30-second one. We ran the water for 30 seconds and then put the next container under the sink. And that's the number we got. And you can see that it really dropped. If you look at the March 2022, it was 12.5 parts per billion, the first draw. Then the 30-second, after we ran the water for 30 seconds, it drops to less than 1 part per billion. I don't think they can even measure it. So I don't know how much was in. And then the 10-minute draw appears to be the same as the 30-second draw. So when I saw this, I said to myself, and I'm telling other people, but Andrew's telling me that I'm wrong. But I've been telling people, whatever else you do, even if you can't afford to spend $6,000-7,000 getting in a new copper line, run your water for 30 seconds in the morning before you fill up your coffee pot. But I'm not sure I'm right telling people Not 30 seconds.
If you're gonna do something like that, it's not 30 seconds. You want to run the water for like 5 minutes before you do that.
Okay, but I just want to tell you, I followed those instructions very carefully and look how they dropped. Look how they dropped.
Yes.
I mean, and then you see in August 2022, Orchid Sewer and Water came in, they replaced all the way, not just to the curb, but across the street too. It was $6,625. Then December, March, and June, the same thing happened. It keeps getting lower and lower. Maybe that's your orthophosphate treatment. I don't know. But after 30 seconds, it always drops to less than 1 part per billion. So I'm mystified. And that's the end.
We could talk about it after.
We could talk about specific home results. Like I said, specific home results are, we don't look at specific home results when we look at these sampling pools. We look at the average because we have to take a look at individual home plumbing, like how the service line is potentially situated on the property. We just try and take a look at the aggregate rather than individual, but more than happy to talk after the meeting.
Telling you not to tell people, run your water before you make the coffee in the morning, run it for more than 30 seconds, run it for 5 minutes, you said.
Yeah, the letter talks about running your water before. You always want to try and flush out the water main. Sometimes what you want to do is you want to change your morning routine a little bit before you make the coffee, take a shower, then run your water and just try and flush out the line of any kind. You don't want to have any stagnant water in the home.
Yeah, they also, when you run your water like that, like they were saying for 5 minutes, it's not just lead you're getting out. If there's anything else in your pipe, that would also come out. Because you could say you have like a rusty pipe, right? That's not lead, but that's going to be in your morning coffee unless you run the water and kind of clear it out.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Leo, your story. And I think it's good for people to hear who are considering replacing their lead service line and maybe intimidated by it, thinking it's gonna, ruin their lawn. It's gonna be a big, lengthy undertaking. So thank you for sharing that.
So the only other item I have is, I have some of our water conservation flyers, if anyone wants to take one. I brought some extras for Miss Bailey, and I didn't know, Miss Bailey, did you have anything on water conservation for tonight?
Yes, I did make up a few slides. Just go to the second slide. This graph is from a report that the U.S. Geological Survey put out in 2017. And what this chart shows is the domestic per capita water usage by state for 2010 and 2015. So the green is the 2010 and the blue is the 2015. And it's kind of interesting how they did this graph. You probably can't read the numbers at the bottom, but it's by geography west to east. So the number on the first one next to the left-hand axis is Hawaii, and then Alaska, and then it goes to the east, and then the last number on the east side is the Virgin Islands. So you can see that the highest numbers are being consumed. Oh, sorry, thank you. The highest numbers are being produced in the arid states out in the Southwest, Nevada, Idaho, Arizona, Utah. Those are those high numbers that are sort of toward the left-hand edge of the graph. Now, I put that blue arrow on the New York number. The New York number I'm judging from the graph is about 70 gallons per day per capita. And the red dotted line indicates the average for the United States, which the U.S. Geological Survey has calculated as 80 gallons per day per capita. So on the next slide, I'm going to compare that to our results for Garden City and Long Island. So these results come from the Garden City results, the top 6 lines. They come from the annual report that all the public water suppliers are required to send to New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. So here we have the Garden City numbers for 2012 through 2016. And then Mr. Carey was kind enough to send me the 2022 report. So I added that line on as well. Looking at the middle column, our per capita number is around 200, but that's a little high for two reasons. First of all, it includes non-revenue water, which is water that doesn't get billed, that gets pumped, but it doesn't get billed. That's water that, for example, is used for flushing water mains or used for firefighting or things of that nature. In the Garden City 2017 report, the non-revenue water percent was reported as 9.5%. So on the second column from the right, I've reduced the number to allow for that 9.5% non-revenue. So that brings our per capita down to 175, 184. But that is still a little high because it hasn't broken out the commercial, municipal, and industrial use. In the 2022 report, that is broken out, and the residential use is 75% of the total revenue water that is pumped. So if you reduce the numbers down to 75%, you get the column on the right-hand side, which is the actual number for residential buildings in Garden City. So as you can see, the numbers range from 131 to 157. So we're significantly higher than the national average of 80. Then the two numbers at the bottom, they come from the report, the State of the Aquifer report for 2022 that the Long Island Commission for Aquifer Protection put out. And those numbers are 135 gallons per person for Nassau County and 120 gallons per person for Suffolk County. So you can see that Long Island is above the national average in terms of how much water we consume per capita. Next slide. Okay, this slide is a screenshot right off the New York State DEC website. These regulations went into effect on June 26, 2023, and you cannot sell or install a fixture in New York State that exceeds the flow rates that are listed in this table. So for example, the top line is shower heads, 1.8 gallons per minute. That is the maximum flow rate you can have in your, if you install a shower head in Garden City in New York State now. On the next slide, I've taken these numbers and I've just done some example calculations. And I want to just emphasize this, an example. You'd have to figure out what the situation is for your own house. Top line, if you brush your teeth at 1.2 gallons per minute maximum flow rate, the American Dental Association recommends you brush your teeth for 2 minutes each time. So if you do that twice a day for 365 days and you don't turn off the water while you're brushing your teeth, you're going to use 1,752 gallons of water just going down the drain while you're brushing your teeth over a year's time. Toilet, the maximum gallons per flush is 1.28. If you're installing a new toilet now, I'm just guessing here. So let's say you flush your toilet 5 times a day at 365 days. You'd use 2,336 gallons by the end of the year. So those top lines are examples of how much water you might use for various applications in your house. The bottom 5 lines is what these lines are based on the water, the irrigation system that is installed at my house. I called my irrigation supplier and I asked him, what is the flow rate that goes through the heads of my irrigation system? He said it's 3.5 gallons a minute for the rotating heads that irrigate the lawn, and 3 to 3.1 gallons a minute for the stationary heads that sit in the gardens and water the flowers and things, but they don't move. So now I have 5 zones. The first zone has 2 heads. The second zone has 2 heads. The third zone, which is the gardens, has 4 heads. The fourth zone is also gardens, that has 3 heads. And then the fifth zone, which is my backyard, has 4 heads. My system is set to run at 25 minutes for each of those zones. And there are 78 odd calendar days over the full peak irrigation season, which starts on May 1st and ends on September 30th. So if my irrigation system ran every single day during the peak season, that is how much water it would use. It comes out to 95,550 gallons. So you can see that's a pretty high number compared to the water usage that's actually going on typically inside the house. Now, of course, my system is not going to run every day. I have a smart controller on it. So if it's raining or if the smart controller decides that there's enough soil moisture, it won't run. So that makes these numbers a little high. On the other hand, I cut the duration down from what my irrigation supplier had actually set my program to. So my numbers are going to be lower because I reduced the amount of time in each zone. But nonetheless, as you can see, the irrigation system is using a heck of a lot more water than what's going on inside the house. So there's a few ways you can check on this for yourself if you're interested. If you want to see how much water your irrigation system is using, thank you, Mr. Carey, for making this suggestion. Go and read your water meter on May 1st. And then read it again on October 1st. That'll cover the peak season. And then read it again on March 1st. That'll give you 5 months of the non-peak season. Compare those 2 numbers and you can see how much extra water you're using in your irrigation system. If you save your water bills, that'll tell you to some extent as well, although the months don't exactly necessarily correlate with the months of the peak season. A couple of, next slide, please. Oh, sorry, jump 2 slides. A couple of months ago, I called just out of interest. I called the water department and I said, can you give me any history of water usage at my house? And kudos to whoever I talked to. I don't know who it was, but the email landed in my e-box in 10 minutes. So the guy, whoever I talked to, must have immediately dropped whatever he was doing and pulled the data out. If you make this request from Garden City, you'll get a PDF file that each page looks like this. And you really only need to worry about 2 columns there, the date column and the reading, which is in cubic feet. So if you can't think in cubic feet, you have to convert it to gallons. Anyway, so they gave me data all the way back to 1988. Next slide. Oh, sorry. I thought it was going to be darker. Oh, well, a little hard to see the yellow line. Anyway, that is the water consumption at my house over the last 25 years from 1988 to like one reading ago. So I'm horrified by some of the maximum numbers there. But on the other hand, the trend line is going in the right direction. So that's another way you can possibly look and see what the long-term, how you're doing long-term on conserving water. So, so the bottom line in conclusion, in Garden City, we are above the national average in terms of how much water per capita water consumption we use every day. The national average is 80, and we're somewhere around 140, 143. And if you look at your water bills and some other information, you have ways to figure out what's going on at your own residence. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. We're so lucky to have you on the EAB to present that. What fantastic information, and thanks for sharing it all.
So I would also like to thank Ms. Bailey. That is great data. I love it. And I think the takeaway from that is Long Islanders are just simply put water pigs. Everybody has to have a greener lawn than their neighbor, and that's what it's all about. And Ms. Bailey's data is consistent with our overall pumping throughout the village. It's in the summer months, it's 3 times what it is in the winter months. And I think, Ms. Bailey's conscious of her water use. She has a smart irrigation controller, and I think, you could still see the water in the peaks. But you just think about people who pay no attention to it. And, it's difficult because we have to keep up with that demand and also have enough left over for fire protection. So it's a tough balance to invest in more and more wells when it's really all about conservation. So I am happy that someone did listen to our mailer from a few months ago about reducing the timers on your zone. And it does, I think Ms. Bailey proves that it does make a difference. So if anybody wants one, they're available here at Village Hall. I did bring extras because I know that you go to several events, but thank you very much for that information.
Want to ask questions? As a non-resident? It's a wonderful presentation. I really actually very much enjoyed that. About how much money did you save on your water bill after you kind of, you've done some water conservation procedures, especially after how much you saved on the after installing the smart irrigation?
I can't answer that question because I didn't save my old bills, so I don't know how much I was paying. I'm sorry. The only reason I have the meter reading data is because I requested it from the water department, but I looked through some of my back tax records and I did not save my water bills. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
When we get that data from someone, we'll widely publicize it. Right?
Wouldn't be surprised if it's a couple $100.
Yeah.
I am intrinsically cheap. I had a irrigation system in my house, which I took offline about 15 years ago. And my wife hates the fact that for 3 months during the summer, my lawn looks a bit burnt out. But you can look at my lawn right now and it's not so bad. And I do not water my lawn and have not, except for the 2 little phlox plants I put in the front. All right. Except for those 2 little areas, I haven't watered for several years. And my bill is the minimum bill all the time. And my neighbor complains, oh, we had a $400 water bill. And I says, yeah, mine's $67.
Just out of curiosity, what I really liked about that presentation, the graph that really jumped out at me was the trend analysis at the end. That would be a great tool for residents to have. They could see like a 5-year trend analysis.
Actually, on your water bill, we are required to have a comparison of, I think the past 2 or 3 quarters of the same time of the year. So probably in the fine print, but it's on your water bill.
Right, but like the way the picture's 1,000 words, right? So you look at that graph, it was such a great graph.
We did also send this out and we had a similar graph on here.
Yeah, but I'm curious, like if a resident could see, I mean, again, you can have some effect if you can have a very wet summer or a very hot summer.
Right.
It could throw the graph off a little bit. But predominantly if that was something that was not too cost prohibitive for the village to do, I think that somebody could see a picture like, wow, look at this, mine instinctively going up. What's my trend? And, like just at a snapshot, you can see how effective she's been in reducing her water. So I don't know if that's something that, I mean, you guys have the data, though I don't know if production of that data on the water bill would be, cost prohibitive. But it might be something.
Well, I mean, it's already on there to put it in the form of a graph. We could look at it.
Is there any way like we can talk to some of the, there's all these sprinkler companies in town And most of the time, the sprinkler companies are the ones setting the timers. And we like speak to them and kind of say, we recommend instead of having 25 minutes a zone, that we take it down to like 17 minutes a zone or something like that. Or is that like
These,
illegal, or, I mean, you know what I mean? Like,
no,
we
it's a good
overstepping our
question.
bounds? I mean,
The
we recommend that.
the Sprinkler Association, believe it or not, there is a group called the Sprinkler Association. They are part of the Long Island Water Conference. They attend all of our meetings. They were also involved with LICAP for a while, when I participated, and we tried to reach out through them, but there are so many unlicensed sprinkler companies out there. It's tough to reach them all, but we would definitely like to educate them.
If you have a smart controller, you can set it on the app on your cell phone. That's what I did. It was really simple.
I think maybe next spring, when people start putting their sprinklers on again, maybe Elizabeth, you could write an article about, you know, the benefits of a smart system and how easy it is to reduce the time.
Yeah, I think also the information comes out almost after the fact. You get the water bill, how much water you used in the summer, was too late. It's almost like you need that information before the summer begins. So you know, like, look, you're gonna get this big water bill. Look what you had last year. So maybe you should set it back instead of doing, like, I think most people it's defaulted to 30. Maybe said, yeah, 30. Say, you know, cut it back to 20. And that would reduce your water bill by 30.
We have a question in the audience. Oh, microphone. Oh.
That potentially what we could do is put out a piece with some projections on if you have your sprinklers. I don't think most people are sprinkling for 25 minutes. I think it's more like 40 minutes per zone. And some have that's what I was told. But just regardless, if you're setting your sprinkler at 30 minutes a zone, if you cut it to 15 minutes and you watered your grass 3 days a week, here is what you could potentially save on and do some sort of projections before the summer starts. Because that article that was in the paper that talks about the houses out in Southampton and how many gallons they're using, 300 million or something that they're using at those two houses on Meadow Lane. I think that woke people up to the idea that people are using a tremendous amount of water on their grass. But to bring it home here, you're right, for, you know, to tell people how much they would actually save, even if it's not your numbers, it could be just a projection.
Great idea. Thank you. And maybe we push something out, just like Evelyn said, when people are getting their sprinkler system set. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, great ideas. We did do this past summer. We did a little late because we had to develop it and get it approved, but we could do something similar a little earlier next year with some of these ideas on it and mail it out again.
Yeah, it was excellent, the flyer. And we can even share some of that graphics online or in an ad in the Garden City News. Thank you.
And I think it ties in nicely with some of the landscaping work that we've done on the EAB and some of the other presentations. So maybe consolidating some of those files and making it so that we don't have to necessarily repeat the same information over and over, but make it so that it's accessible and as it's timely, point people into that direction.
Good idea. All right. Any other comments, questions in the room? Yep.
I'd just like to follow up with a couple of things from our June, well, maybe not June, maybe it was July or August meetings. Maybe the students know, have you noticed if there are recycling bins that seem to be getting picked up, or Mr. Baroni, has that come together? We talked about that. Remember the recycling we started talking about the high school, but then the other schools, have you noticed in the cafeteria? Are they?
Yeah, we did reach out to the school district, Mr. Foley that works over there, and they were supposed to implement a recycling program a few weeks ago. I can follow up and see if they ever did. We did. Our sanitation department has scheduled with them to pick up the recycling.
And then two other questions, please. did I miss it? Do we have the arborist? Because I saw another lantern fly in my driveway today. And did we finalize the signage in the village yard? So we
So-
could put it in the recycling tips or an article in the paper or something?
So the arborist question would be better handled by the Parks Department.
Okay,
Fortunately not here tonight. And the second question regarding the signage is I had sent something to the board for review and just waiting on approval. Once I have approval, we can make the signs and put them up.
We're good on it.
Things Allison was just gonna follow up on them.
Yes, it was all great. There was just one question about what's the definition of rubbish? So I had proposed some language. So maybe we could just route that again and say this is copacetic.
Sure. While we work on that, would you like me to start with the other signs?
I thought they all looked
Yeah, the
fantastic. I
other
think everyone
paper
was
signs
happy.
were
Sure.
great shape.
Will do.
Thank you. Right, any other topics? Is there a motion to adjourn? Second, all in favor? Right, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.